Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Okay, so the Browns had their first joint practice session of the offseason. Keep in mind, it's only going to be one practice versus the Carolina Panthers, a day off, and then they play the Carolina Panthers in the preseason game. Browns will have their second joint practice session against the Philadelphia Eagles, which would be two practices and a game. So they're upping their joint practices from 2 to 3 from last year, as well as a overall emphasis, I think, since OTAs of more physicality in these camps here. And that's going to factor in when we talk about who's playing in the preseason, who's not. So first, let's start with that, right? A lot of news about the preseason. We talked about Shador Sanders getting the opportunity to start on Friday, which I think is big for him. I think it's going to be a nice opportunity. If you want to know more about what I think about Shador and the opportunity ahead of him, go ahead, watch that video I dropped on it. It has more than enough information about how I feel about that, which is overall, it's a good opportunity. It's kind of a win and no lose situation. Too long didn't read. I'm not really going to criticize him too much if he struggles versus the Panthers first team defense, while he has like the second and third stringers with him. If he does look good, then awesome, move him up the depth chart. All right, so Panthers will be playing their starters, like I mentioned, for about 2 series. They confirmed that today. The Browns will not be playing their starters. Now, every year when this happens, there is a little bit of a debate, right? And I'm usually on the side of the Browns need to play their starters. I don't like how we operate camp. But there's a big piece that's changed, which is the overall physicality of camp. When the Browns weren't being physical in camp and they weren't playing guys in the preseason, I thought that was an awful strategy, right? That was one of my main criticisms of how Kevin handled camp, was like, hey, we're not being physical in training camp. We're not being physical in practice. And then we're not doing any physicality during the preseason. And then we're expecting these guys to just ramp that up by the time the start of the season happens. And I thought that was setting up the team for failure at that point. They have been so much more physical in Browns camp this year. They've had tackle down to the ground drills. They have been more physical when they're in pads, more physical when they're not in pads. So that level of physicality plus the increase of joint practices, I'm going to be honest with you, the not playing the starters in the first preseason game, it bothers me way less than it did last year because of that, right? This team's being physical. They're doing physical stuff. That's what the concern was, right? It wasn't necessarily me putting my foot down. We must play in the preseason. I don't think there's anything that unique about playing in the preseason. It was like, hey, physicality overall is down, and we're not doing anything to make up for it. Now, this season, physicality has been up in the offseason. They talked about it all camp. Everybody who's been down there has talked about the intensity being up, the physicality being up. I think this is a situation where you're more than fair to not play your starters, and you've earned this break, right? So I'm not really tripping on the fact that the Browns aren't playing their starters. I understand why they're not playing their starters. They've had a physical camp. They're at a place where I think it's okay. We'll see what it looks like during the season, but I don't think they're going into the season so far with a lack of physicality like I thought last year, right? So a little bit of a different situation here. As we're looking for who will play or who won't play, it's the usual suspects, right? So absolutely under no way is Denzel Ward or Myles Garrett or David Njoku going to see the field. I mean, David might, because sometimes David does play in these preseason games. But if David doesn't want to, he won't. And if the team doesn't want him, he won't. So David's on that list of guys who obviously aren't going to play. Joe Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, not going to practice in the preseason more than likely. Ethan Posick probably not going to be in there. Maybe you get Dwan Jones. I would like to see Dwan Jones out there, but I'm not confident you get Dwan Jones. Right tackle, Jack Conklin seems like a bad idea, right? Like, don't play Jack Conklin in preseason. I feel like that's valid. Running back wise, I wouldn't be surprised if they held out Jerome Ford, and not because Jerome Ford's like an all pro or anything like that, and he deserves not to play in these preseason games, but simply because the Browns are incredibly thin at running back right now. They're down to like Amani Marshall taking first team reps, and he's an undrafted free agent. They're really thin at running back. And if I'm the Browns, I would want to avoid something happening to the only guy in the who I'm expecting the guy I'm expecting to start, basically, right? You're just so thin at that position. I don't think you can really afford anything by chance to happen to a running back that you're projecting to start in Jerome Ford. And I think the same kind of logic is going to be why somebody like Greg Newsome doesn't practice, but doesn't play in this preseason game, right? Because if Greg gets hurt, the entire secondary is just screwed at that point. There's not that much depth there. Greg's really the glue holding it together in that room. If he goes down, then this all goes to shit. So that's not a situation I would play with. So I understand why you wouldn't play Jerome. I understand why you wouldn't play Greg. Maybe that can still apply to like a Dwan Jones, even though I think the Browns have more than enough people who can step in and play tackle if something were to happen to Dwan. And that's good, right? The fact that I feel good about, like, if Tevin has to step in, he can play left tackle. If Cornelius Lucas has to step in, he can play left tackle. That's a much better situation to be in than the Browns were last year, where we were too deep in tackle and we were playing dudes off the street. So I wouldn't expect anybody who is like a former Pro Bowler or all pro on this team to play in the preseason. Maybe that last preseason game or that second preseason, not the second preseason game, definitely not the second one. They're not going to play after 2 days of joint practice. So really, like, maybe you might get some of the starters that last preseason game for a drive or two. Maybe, right? I doubt it. I'm going to say it right here. I don't think we're going to see the starters in preseason. I think they're being physical enough in camp. I think they're having enough joint practices where they can feel fine with not playing any of these guys in the preseason. And like, certain guys like Myles Garrett, like, never needs to play in the preseason, right? The guys I do hope to see are like the rookies, right? Dylan Sampson, I think he needs to play. Mason Graham, would love to see him out there for a little bit, right? Carson Schlesinger, would love to see him out there. He's another one that might not play. Now, I'm not getting this off anything, but I'm just looking at the room and I'm like, hey, this is a very thin room. They don't have a lot of bodies. He's a very important starter. They've already lost their last two Mike linebackers in Jordan Hicks to retirement, and then JOK to a year-long injury. So they might not be willing to put Carson out there, but since he's a rookie, he might play a little bit. He's on that watch list of guys I really wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play, just because the position is so thin right now. You can't afford any injuries. So maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't, but would love to see those guys out there, right? Harold Fainin, would love to see him out there. This run game in general, right? Like, there are some guys I really do need to see do some specific things, right? Like Harold Fainin, because he's going to be asked to do a lot of like pull, a lot of wrap blocking, stuff like that in a heavy gap scheme system, which we all anticipate this being for the Cleveland Browns. And then somebody like Dwan Jones, I would just like to see him out there because he's making a transition to left tackle. That's going to be new for him. Want to see how he does making that transition. So that's kind of my hopes for who plays in this preseason game, who doesn't need to play, and kind of my overall thoughts about playing the starters in the preseason this specific year, because I do think it's different because the Browns have been a lot more physical from the jump. I don't think it's as necessary to play a ton of these guys in the preseason as it might have been in years past where you weren't having any physicality. This team seems to be ready for a physical punch here, right? They were able to meet the Panthers, be pretty physical, not get bullied, all that stuff. Great stuff there. Let's talk about the practice in itself. Not a ton of details came out about this practice. That's sometimes how it is with joint practice. I think that's the one thing that sucks about them, is that they're hidden away from the public. I think that's something coaches like about it, because coaches love to be secret over Nothing. They like to act like the game of football has not been played for almost 100 years and that everything that can be done has been done. And they think they're going to shock the world with all these things that they're hiding from the public, but it's not. So they are a little bit needlessly kind of over the top with how secretive they are with camp. But there is some good stuff. I think the passing offense is having some moments there, right? Jerry Jeudy made a nice catch from Joe Flacco. Same thing happened with Jerry Jeudy in a 7-on-7 red zone drill with Kenny Pickett. So some nice throws from the two guys competing to be the starter to the number one wide receiver on the team. Nice to see that Jerry Jeudy looks like a star so far. And this is going to bring me to my one of my main points about today's practice, because you didn't hear great stuff from the Browns run game. It looks like the Panthers were able to get on top of most of what the Browns were able to do in the run game. And I know this offseason there was so much focus, or there has been so much focus on the pass game in general, whether we're talking about quarterbacks, whether we're talking about wide receivers. There's been a heavy emphasis on those two, a critical eye placed to those two positions. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm much less worried about the passing offense's ability to hold up their end of the bargain when it comes to this offense than I am about this run offense's ability to hold up their end of the bargain. Not saying that I think the Browns' passing offense should be way better than their running offense, even though I don't think that's out the realm of possibility, and that's not a good thing. But I think what the passing offense is being asked to do is not that much, and I think they're going to be capable of doing not that much, right, of what they've been asked for. I think they're going to be able to do that. The run game is going to be asked to do a lot this year, and I'm not confident that this run game is going to be capable of that. I would love to be surprised, but I'm just not confident so far that we have built something that's capable of doing that thing. We're getting stuffed against Carolina Panthers. Every time I saw them run the ball at practice, it was a lot of stuffs. And, the Browns defensive line is really good, so you give them the benefit of the doubt. And it's not like the Panthers have a trash D-line either, right? They have a pretty solid D-line. And to be fair, like, they're going to go up against like the Eagles and they have a good D line. So really do need to see this offensive line and this run game look good at some point, because if you look at all of the things that make up the Browns offense, right, that you would be concerned about. Well, let's go through it. The offensive line last year fared significantly better in pass blocking than in run blocking. And then if you take out the Deshaun Watson games, you take out the games where the Browns offensive line wasn't healthy, they were fine as an offensive line from a pass blocking perspective, right? So they're going to be able to pass protect as long as they're healthy. And as long as the quarterbacks that are in there are not reckless with the pocket, which from watching these guys at camp, I don't think any of these guys are reckless with the pocket. Even somebody like Shador, who gets heavily criticized for his pocket habits, I don't think he's as bad as Deshaun Watson, if I'm being frank with you. I think he's better in a significant improvement than Deshaun Watson was from a pocket management standpoint at this point. Same thing with Dylan Gabriel. Joe Flacco is one of the best at that. And then you have Kenny Pickett, who's fine, right? So I don't think you're going to run into those problems. If we look at the receiving weapons, right? Jerry Jeudy is a legitimate star now, right? David Njoku, we know what he is, right? He's a pretty good tight end, close to a star level tight end. Some people would consider him at that. Cedric Tillman, when he got targets last year, was very, very productive for this team, right? Was on a 17-game pace for about 1,100 yards when he was getting that span where he was actually getting the ball once Deshaun Watson went down. So there's reason to believe in him. Deontay Johnson, look, we know his issues as far as like coaches and discipline and all of that, but on the football field, he's 29 years old and he's a former All-Pro, and he looks like it when you see him out there, right? Like the flashes are still there of a really productive player. I know everybody's been conditioned to be concerned about these wide receivers, and we've talked about these wide receivers to death, and everybody's like, oh my God, look at the wide receiver room. It's so bad. We're starting Jamari Thrash on these unofficial depth charts, which don't mean shit, right? And people can freak out about it, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not really that. I mean, I haven't even brought up Harold Feynman, who's looked pretty good. I'm not really worried about the passing game as much, even if we're talking about quarterbacks. I mean, Joe Flacco has looked fine. He's looked like the Joe Flacco we remember from 2023. Good and bad, right? Interceptions and all, but also, getting the ball downfield, getting big chunk plays, handling the pocket well, all of that stuff. Joe Flacco has looked pretty much like he did in 2023. Kenny Pickett, as much as I don't like Kenny Pickett, most of the people down there say Kenny Pickett's been fine, right? Dylan Gabriel, he's had some rough couple of days recently, but he's had his moments in camp. There's been a few days where people have said that Dylan Gabriel looked like the best guy there. And then obviously Shador has had more than his fair share of days where people thought that Shador looked really good. So even the Browns quarterback situation, which everybody has memed to death, it's really not as even close to as bad as it was last year. And as long as they're better than last year, that's going to be a significant improvement for this team. And then the receivers, I think the receivers are fine. Like, I don't think it's that bad of a receiving room. I mean, you can look at other rooms in the AFC North for teams that have much higher hopes than the Cleveland Browns do, and these rooms are pretty similar. Like, what's really the difference between what the Ravens have at wide receiver and what the Browns have at wide receiver? Like, I mean, are those two rooms really that different? Like, I would agree with you that the Ravens have the better room, but it's not that different. They got Cook, DeAndre Hopkins out there as their number 2. The Browns have like Cedric Tillman and old Deontay Johnson. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and Deontay Johnson's only 29. So it's not really that different of a room. You feel me? Like, I think we've made this wide receiver room, this quarterback room, it's been so sensationalized and made to be looked as a disaster that we're really ignoring the bigger problem on the Browns offense, which isn't their ability to throw the football. I think they're going to be able to throw the football fine. Again, they're not going to be good. They're going to be like below average to mediocre, but like that's what, 16th, 18th in the league. I think they'll be around that, like high 20s, low 20s, my bad, low 20s. I think they can get to there in passing offense. I really want to be surprised. Stefanski has done stranger stuff before with the passing offense with these levels of tools. The run game is what I'm worried about. You look at the star power that you have in the receiving room. Again, you got a former All-Pro in Deontay Johnson. You got Cedric Tillman, who's looked pretty good. He's a big body guy. He's huge. TV doesn't do him justice. He's much bigger in person than what you think he is, right? But really productive last year when he got the opportunity. Jerry Jeudy, right? David Njoku, Harold Feynman Jr. You got weapons there. This run game, what are the weapons? I'm being dead serious. Like, even if they brought back Nick Chubb, which, by the way, the reports on Nick Chubb in Houston aren't great. So, and this is a tough one for me to have to, like, if this does happen, because I am somebody who does want to bring Nick Chubb back and would have wanted to bring Nick Chubb back. But the reality is that Andrew Berry usually isn't wrong when he gets rid of these old-ass players. Like, when he lets somebody go, he's usually right. Like, that's one of the things you got to give him credit for. He was right on Amari Cooper. He was right on Jarvis Landry. He was right on Odell Beckham. Like, when these guys get old and he decides they're too old to help, he usually ain't wrong about that, right? So this looks like another one where he is right, but even then it's like, okay, well, where's the star power in his running back room coming from? Where is the impact player in his running back room coming from? The guy that you were expecting to do that right now is fighting a domestic violence charge, so that's not great. So who's going to be the guy, right? Jerome Ford, I think it's a fine number 2 running back. And I think in a gap scheme, he looks a little bigger than he was last year. He'd be fine. But I don't think he's a difference maker in the way that you need a running back to be a difference maker with the expectations that this run game's going to have on it. And that's my big concern is like, okay, all this stuff about the passing game, all this attention about the passing game, cool. That's all fun and, it's easy to market. But really, what about this run game? The Browns offensive line did not do a great job blocking for the run last year. And that's been a weak point for them for about a couple of years. Kevin's strength has been more about what he can create in the pass game than his genius in the run game side of things, right? He's always been, somebody who's relied on regular trends, right? He's not like a genius in the run game. And that's the part of the team that looks like it's not really hitting on all cylinders. Like, again, when are we going to focus on that? I think the pass game is fine, whether it's Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, 8 weeks down the line after the bye week, if it's Dylan Gabriel, Shador Sanders. I think the pass game is going to be able to maintain a certain level of play here. I'm not sure about this run game. There's so many questions about this run game. What is Quincy Junkins going to look like when he finally gets here? When is Quincy Junkins going to finally get here, right? When he gets here, how long is he going to be suspended? Is he going to take this shit into the season, lose his case, and then get suspended? And then you lose the guy for 12 games instead of 6? What's really going on there? You got no veterans to replace him. I know they signed a veteran running back, but the most yardage that guy's gotten this season, I believe, is 200 yards. I think I'm being generous on that. It's no real veteran running backs in this room. You got Amani Marshall, Dylan Sampson. We're really leaning on 4th-round picks, undrafted free agent, Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong. Does that sound like a running back room that can carry an offense? To me, you look at the guys who you want to lean on offense, all those guys are receivers. That's really what it looks like to me, right? It's David Njoku, it's Jerry Jeudy. Who is that guy who's going to command the ball in this run game on the level of Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku? I'm not worried about that, the pass game. I'm worried about this run game. I think more people should be. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have you a better night. Peace.